So this next season here in our gardens, I want to do something that I've been thinking about for quite a while now, for several seasons, is actually starting myself a little bit of a worm farm by building out a really cool worm bin. We're just going to go with something nice and simple today, but I've actually been kind of worm farming already. So right around the corner here from our back fence line, we have this kind of area built out years ago in order to do some composting of all of my fall leaves and the grass clippings that we get from around the property throughout the year. And it gets piled up and piled up and piled up throughout the season, and it continues to break down and break down. And then at the end of the year, I will screen out all of the larger parts and debris that's within the compost to get a really nice, rich compost to add to all of our different garden beds. But this last year, I thought, you know what? Let's try to kick it up a notch a little bit here. And so what I started doing was pulling these back here and digging down inside and putting in some food waste in order to start feeding worms. Now look here, look at all these worms we've got in here now. Just crawling around everywhere, eating up all of that yard waste. And what they're doing is they're contributing their worm castings to our compost here. So we'll have some supercharged vermicompost and compost together here in order to supply some good nutrients and fertilizer, natural fertilizer to our gardens this next season. Now, the one issue about doing this sort of thing here is that we've got all these really great worms, but these worms here are really not the best composting worms that you're going to find in your garden spaces. There are hundreds of different varieties of worms, thousands of them even, but there are lots and lots of really great worms that you'll get inside of your garden spaces. But for the most part, these worms here aren't necessarily the best for composting our food waste, even though they do a really great job here and will contribute to our compost that we're going to use next year. What we really want is some really good composters so that we can have a nice vermicompost system to be able to extract those worm castings and be able to ultimately make some good worm teas and be able to use those castings throughout our different garden beds in the garden. So for the first worm composting bin or system that we're going to be using here in our gardens this next year, I'm just going to be using a couple of these heavy duty storage bins. Now there are lots of different types of bins that you can create and make, and I encourage you to check out this book, Worms Eat My Garbage by Mary Applehoff, and recently updated by Joanne Olszewski. It's got all sorts of really great information about worm farming, vermicompost, all the things that you need to know, plus again, a bunch of different other types of systems that you could build for yourself in your own gardens. Now we are using two different bins here. We're going to be setting them up and basically drilling some holes and all of that just the same way for both of them. And I'll show you how they both work together here just a little bit later on in the video. But for now, let's get these all set up. Now what we're going to do is very first, we're going to start drilling some 1/4 inch holes into the bottom of the container. The thing we want to think about too is to take a look at the bottom of our container and see where the lowest low points are, because a lot of these containers have these little divots and all that sort of stuff in there. You'll want to put your holes into what's going to be the lowest parts of it. In fact, these ones here kind of have this little center that pops in and out. We're going to keep it popped out so that all the water flows down towards the middle there. What we're going to do is make holes that kind of lead up to it in these little trenches here, so that all of our leachate that comes out of the worm system will come down into our bottom tray. Also, before we start drilling, what I've done is I've set down some boards here so that we can drill through the bottom down. You don't want to be drilling into your containers from the top down like this, as you could possibly break this plastic. That is one of the downfalls of these sort of things. So I'll just set up some wood here and we'll just drill into those grooves right from the inside. So now that we've got all the holes on the bottom of the container all drilled out, the next step for us here is to drill some ventilation holes. So just like we did with the bottom, we've got to examine our container. All of them are all a little bit different. We want to check these lips and make sure that we're going to be able to have the ventilation where we need them. And then when we place this into the other one, it's also got to be able to be up above your first container on the bottom too. So we want to make sure they're kind of up here, maybe just a little bit into this ridge right here. That we can do by drilling again from the inside out, and we'll drill holes right along the top here all the way around to make sure that our worms have plenty of ventilation, and that will let them thrive. So there we go. We got all of our holes drilled all around the edge there. And another thing too about having them up under the lip like this is that when we get the lid on there and all of that, this lip will kind of help create some shade and not allow the light to really push through these holes there, which will make our worms just a little bit more comfortable. But we've got plenty of ventilation for them. Okay, so now we've got both of our containers with all of their holes for ventilation and the bottom in order to allow for our worms, say leachate, to leach out. But there is one other use for these holes on the bottom that we're still going to talk about here just a little bit in the video. But now it's time to start thinking about the bedding that we're going to create for all of our worms to live in. So for our bedding that we're going to use for our worms here in our worm bin, I've sourced out a bunch of different materials from around the house and gardens here. But I encourage you again to check out that book, Worms Eat My Garbage. You've got a lot of great information in there and some more materials that you could use for your bedding. Now, in our worm bin, we are going to use coco coir as kind of our primary bedding. And you could use peat moss if you want to, or if you have it around. I don't really think it's a renewable resource, so ultimately we use mostly coco coir in the different applications in our garden, so we'll be using it for our worm bin here. But if you do have some peat moss, and you know, I use it every now and then too. It's if it's given to me or if I've gotten some free from someone else or whatever. But for the most part, we do use coco coir. The thing to think about when it comes to coco coir, though, is that it can be really salty. So what you'll want to do, I've taken this coir here and I've put it into a container, and it's got a screen on the bottom of it and some holes. And what I've done is just kind of like use the hose, just kind of wash through all of this coco coir to wash out as much of that salt as possible. I mean, salt is just really not going to be good for your worms. It'll dry them out and ultimately kill them. So make sure it's nice and washed if you're using coco coir. And then what we've got over here are some brown paper bags, grocery bags. And what I've done here is I've ran them through a paper shredder. And then after the paper shredder, I put them into a bucket and we soaked them for a little while. And then I used the same container that we used for our coco coir with the screen on the bottom. And then we just kind of pour them in there and let them screen out all of the water from there. And then that's what we'll be using along with the coco coir. And we've also resourced some leaves from our front yard here. The worms will love these leaves, so we'll be incorporating some of those as well. And here we've got, yeah, everybody's favorite, coffee. So we got a bunch of coffee grounds here, including the filters. So this will be really good grit for these worms. So they're gonna love having some coffee in their bedding. And then we also got some eggshells. And what I've done here with the eggshells is I've put them in a food processor, and we've really pulverized them down so that they're as small as we could get them. And we'll kind of pour some of those in there as well to kind of help add a little bit of a calcium source that'll ultimately break down into our vermicompost here as well too. So again, there are different ingredients you can use, but all of these ingredients here are different things that our worms can eat. So they want to live in a bedding of things that they can eat, because that's what worms primarily do. They don't really live in soil per se. They kind of live up into all of these debris and all these things that they can eat. And so we're gonna give them a bedding as such. And when it comes down to how much of each of these we're gonna put in there, that's really up to you when it comes down to it. The coir we're gonna have the most of. Probably the second most we'll have with the paper bags and some leaves, and then we're just gonna basically sprinkle in these sort of things to go along with it as well. Kind of hoping that we're gonna have a nice, you know, kind of halfway up our bin type of bedding. So let's mix this all up and get these ready for our worms. Now we got that all mixed up. And one of the things I also did do there is I kind of saved a little bit of our brown paper bag shreddings there to kind of top it off here. We'll also put another like whole, maybe one or two of those brown paper bags on top of this after we add our worms. But yeah, I think that's what time it is. Let's add some worms. So all right, now that our bin is all ready and prepped with all the bedding, it's time to add in our worms. And as I mentioned earlier, there are tons of different worms, thousands of them even, but only really a select few that are really great at composting and that you're gonna wanna put into your vermicomposting worm bin. So one of the best ones are called red wigglers, Acenia fetida. And you can get these from a lot of different sources out there. Just look up ordering compost worms on in Google or something like that, you'll find a ton of them. There's companies like Uncle Jim's Worm Farm and the such. But for me, I'm kind of lucky. I've got a company here locally to me, right out of my own town here in Southern Oregon, that does composting worms as well as all sorts of other beneficial insects for your garden. And they're called Tip Top Biocontrol, and I'll have a link down below in the description to their website, and you can check that out if you want to as well too. So I just was able to pick these up at my local nursery, and they got them in a nice little cooler to keep them cool and all of that, in order to kind of keep them a little dormant. Once it cools down, they kind of stop moving too much and huddle together to keep warm. But that's one of the things you want to do too, is if you are bringing them out of a cool situation like that, you want to kind of let them sit out for a little bit before you add them to your worm bin. And for the most part, even if you did just add them straight in there, they're going to find their way down into your bedding that you've set up for them. Now we're going to just go ahead and open this up here. And inside of our container, it's got a lot of, looks like already, some maybe some peat moss, some wood chips, and some things like that. And yep, dig in just down a little ways from the top, and you can start feeling those worms in there. And there's a nice bunch of them right there. Yeah. So they are already, in fact, jumping out of my hands right here. So what I'm going to do is pull back that top layer just a little bit here. Let's go ahead and add these worms in. And basically we're just going to dump them right in there and check the inside and see if there's any kind of stuck up on the side of the container. But yeah, and then we'll just kind of loosen them up just a little bit there and spread them out across the top here. Now these worms that are going into the container here have been stored away for a while, and yeah, some of that bedding that they've been stored in, they've been eating on and all of that, but they're going to be really, really excited to find all of the great things that we've got in our bedding and start to feed off of all of that here real soon as well too. So worms do not like the light, so as you spread them out on top here, their initial reaction is to start burrowing their way down into the bedding. Now what we're going to do is we're going to give them a little while to start digging down inside of there and burrow themselves right into that. We're going to go ahead and spread out our top layer there of the paper bag shredding. And real quick, on top of the shredded paper that we have here as a layer, we're also going to put in, I've got more of these paper grocery bags here, and they just kind of happen to fit my container just right, so that's what I'm using. You could use, say, a piece of plastic or a piece of cardboard that you could cut in order to fit into the container. And this is to just kind of give it an extra layer to keep them kind of away from any possible light that could come in. Say you're even lifting up the lid, or maybe possible light that could come through some of these holes here as well too. And that'll keep them nice and comfortable underneath of there and coming to the top and eating all of those food scraps that you're going to be putting in the bin here to feed them. So all right, we've waited a couple of days and now it's time to feed our worms. So over the last couple of days, I've been saving my food scraps so that we can feed these worms in our worm bin. And basically, just all sorts of food scraps will do. Worms will eat a lot of stuff, even more so than what you would actually put into your compost bin. If you wanted to find out even a really good list or even more things that you can put into your worm bin, check out again this book here. I think it's really great. I think you should pick it up. Worms Eat My Garbage. Lots of great resources on all of the different things you can put into the worm bin and feed your worms. So again, I've got, like, you know, some apples. I think there's some celery in here, some cucumber scraps. We've got all sorts of good things in here. And I know these worms are going to absolutely love it, because again, they're probably really hungry for some of this really good tasty stuff versus all the stuff in the bedding that they've actually been eating over the last couple of days, and all that stuff they've been sitting in for who knows how long that they've been inside of that bucket. So let's get down in here. Let's feed these worms. So we're gonna spread our little layer of those. Oh, look at that, there they go, scrambling right back down in there. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're just gonna kind of move, and in fact what we'll want to do is I'm gonna kind of split this in half. What we'll do is we'll feed on this side for a while and let them eat on all of that, and then after a while, the next time I come to feed, I'll feed on this side. We'll just kind of alternate it back and forth as we're going through our feeding time with these guys. So let's go ahead and just move these over here and clear out a space. Just kind of dig in just a little ways here. And create a nice little hole there. And just gonna take some of our food scraps here. We're gonna dump some of those right in there. Yeah, I may have saved just a little bit more than what we're gonna need for right now, but I'll just add all of that to my compost bin that I've got out there in the alleyway, and those worms will really love the rest of that as well too. So let's go ahead, just kind of bury that right in there, and then we'll cover it right up with those. Just like that. Now those worms are gonna love those tasty food scraps. Put that right back on top. And close it all up. So this is where the next step comes in, when we're going to try to harvest the worm castings. Now, months from now, when they've eaten up most all of the foods that we've fed them for a while, and their bedding, and it looks like, you know, they've eaten most of that up, and we've left with all of those good, rich worm castings, what we're going to want to do is remove the worms from the castings in order to harvest them. So what we're going to end up doing is the exact same thing as we did with this container, and we're going to fill in a fresh bedding, put all fresh bedding and all of that. We're going to layer our shredded paper, and then our top with the paper bags on top, just like we did with this side. But then what we're going to do, let's take this off real quick. And then what we'll do is we're gonna take this container and we're gonna set it right on top there like that. And now that most of the food and the bedding resources have been kind of depleted and eaten, most all of those worms now are going to start migrating up through all of our little holes that we've drilled in here too. So this isn't just for drainage, these holes. This is also so that our worms can come up through our first container and basically, again, migrate up into this container here. Now that's going to take a while. We're going to give it a few weeks in order to make sure that most all of our worms have made it up into this top bin, and then we will remove it. We'll harvest our castings from here. We'll clean it all out, and then we'll get this one set to go on top of this one when it's ready. So they'll just kind of alternate back and forth, creating a nice, cool little two-tiered worm system in order to make sure we're harvesting all of those really great worm castings. And as well too, those holes on the bottom will leak. So that liquid that comes out of the bottom is called a leachate. And a lot of people call it a worm tea, but it's actually a leachate. And we'll be collecting that here on the bottom tray here as well. And I didn't really think about it when I first got these, otherwise I might have thought about a different container or not, but these got all these little ridges and holes, so our leachate's gonna kind of get in here. But then again, we are going to be watering down any of that leachate before we use it in our garden. So we can basically just kind of like wash it off into another container when the time comes for us to be able to do that. And again, I've also put a couple of pieces of wood here just to kind of keep that up a little bit. And then all of that leachate will drip right down into that top tray. So there you have it. Nice, inexpensive, easy worm container. And as far as inexpensive too, I mean, we really only spent, I think I spent 9 something for each of these. You know, all the bags, the leaves, the cocoa coir I kind of already had sourced here. So all in all I really bought was, I think I spent like $10 at my nursery to get the worms, and then $10 for each of these. So altogether we got a really great worm composting system for about $30. So not bad, and can't wait to harvest all those castings. One last thing before we finish up is storage. Where are we going to keep our worm container? We do want to make sure that our worms are active and working and eating all of those great food scraps that we've got and producing all of those worm castings, so we don't want them to get too cold. Because remember, as the temperatures start to reach towards 40 degrees, these worms are going to become inactive and they're not going to be doing all that work we want them to do. So make sure you put them in a nice place where they're going to stay warm, up above 50, close around 60, maybe a nice attached garage or a basement, or places like that could really work as well too. But yeah, you want these guys working. So there you have it. A nice and easy worm bin, so you can start your very own vermicomposting system right in your own gardens. Now, again, when we start harvesting that, we've got a lot of different spaces to be able to feed those worm castings to. So what we're going to do is we're going to increase the value of those castings that we get by making a worm tea. So stay tuned, as we'll be talking about that when it's time to harvest up all of our castings. But for now, I want to thank you all so much for joining us here on the Urban Gardener channel. So be sure to hit the thumbs up, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and also be sure to share our channel with all of your gardening friends and let them know that we're growing lots of great things here on the Urban Gardener channel. We'll see all of you on our next video. So for our first worm bun, worm bun? Is that what I was gonna say? Was I gonna say worm bun? The soil down at the bottom, and I kind of, What's up, buddy? What are you doing, Dexter? Yeah? How's it going, brother? What are you up to? Next season, I want to do something I've been wanting to do. All right, let's try this again. All right, it's been a while since I've done outtakes too, though, so I hope you're enjoying. By Joanne Olszewski. Joanne Olszewski. Olszewski. Appelhof and recently updated by Joanne Olszewski. Oh my God. These names are gonna kill me.